April 12, 1981. Kennedy Space Center. Columbia lifts off on the first crewed flight of a new era. The dream was simple: a reusable spaceplane launching weekly, delivering satellites and crews for a fraction of the cost of rockets. The reality? Over $1 billion per flight, 14 lives lost, and the program canceled after 30 years. Today I'm looking at why the shuttle failed not just technically, but economically and culturally, and why that still matters today when we hear the same promises about sustainable moon missions. If you're into deep dives on engineering and the gap between ambition and reality, consider subscribing. I break down complex topics like this regularly. Here is how it happened. The original vision was compelling. After Apollo, NASA wanted routine access to space. The shuttle would launch up to 50 times per year for as little as $20 to $30 million per flight. A space truck would turn it around in weeks, gas it up, launch again. That was the pitch. But as it turns out, failure is rarely that simple. Take the Hubble Space Telescope. The shuttle didn't just deploy it in 1990, it saved it 5 times. When Hubble's mirror turned out to be flawed, the shuttle carried up corrective optics. When gyros failed, when instruments aged, the shuttle was there. Without those servicing missions, Hubble would have been a $2 billion mistake. Instead, it's one of the most productive scientific instruments in history. Then there's the International Space Station. The shuttle's massive cargo bay and robotic arm made ISS assembly possible. Modules like Destiny, Columbus, and Kaibo all delivered by shuttle. You couldn't have launched those on conventional rockets. The ISS exists because the shuttle existed, but even with those achievements, the shuttle never came close to its goals. 50 flights per year became 4 or 5. 20 million per launch became over $1 billion. The space truck vision was a mirage. The shuttle proved you could do impressive things while still failing at the basic business case. Complexity and capability don't guarantee success. The real problems start with the math. The promise was $20 to $30 million per launch. The reality? Each flight averaged over $1 billion. That's off by a factor of 30. Turning the shuttle around between flights was an industrial operation that made reusable sound like a joke. Start with the heat shield. The shuttle's underside was covered with 24,000 individual tiles, each one unique, shaped for its exact spot, each inspected by hand after every flight, many damaged or missing, needing replacement. That alone took thousands of hours. That's not maintenance, that's reconstruction. The 3 main engines were torn down, inspected, and rebuilt after every mission. Not refurbished, rebuilt. The turbo pumps, combustion chambers, the whole assembly. A small army of technicians worked for weeks on each one. The solid rocket boosters? After each launch, recovery ships fished the empty casings out of the ocean, hauled them back, cleaned off corrosion, disassembled them, inspected every segment, reassembled them with new propellant, and stacked them on the pad. It was like reusing a paper bag you dropped in the ocean and set on fire. At its peak, the program employed around 25,000 people, a small city whose only job was to keep one vehicle flying a handful of times a year. The cost per kilogram to orbit was about $54,000, nearly double what you'd pay on a disposable rocket like Atlas or Soyuz. More expensive than promised, and more expensive than the old way. The lesson is simple. Reusable doesn't mean cheap unless the turnaround is cheap. You can reuse hardware and still bankrupt yourself. Beyond the money, you have to look at the machine itself. The shuttle wasn't one machine. It was 3 separate elements that all had to work perfectly every time. The orbiter, the external tank, the 2 solid rocket boosters, each piece designed by different teams, built by different contractors. The real danger wasn't in any single piece. It was in the seams between them. Thousands of potential failure points. Every bolt, seal, and sensor had to survive launch vibration, acceleration stress, and space temperature swings. And unlike disposable rockets, the shuttle had to survive all that and come back for more. The heat shield is the perfect example. 24,000 tiles, each unique. If tile 8,473 fell off, You couldn't use tile 8474. You needed the exact replacement, bonded by hand. Any missing tile could be catastrophic. During re-entry, the underside reached 1,600 degrees Celsius. A single gap could let heat inside, and the vehicle would disintegrate. That's what happened to Columbia. A piece of foam punched a hole in the wing. 7 astronauts died because of a gap smaller than a dinner plate. Compare that to a capsule, one ablative heat shield that burns away during re-entry, then gets replaced. Simple, forgiving. One component, not 24,000. The shuttle also had to be 3 vehicles in one. It launched like a rocket. It operated in orbit like a spacecraft. It landed like an airplane at 300 kilometers per hour. Each roll required compromises. Wings added weight during launch. The payload bay made it bulky in orbit. The engines were so complex they needed rebuilding after every flight. Every clever solution added another thing that could break. Stack enough of them and you don't get reliability. You get a system where the next flight is always a gamble. It was an engineering marvel, but a logistical nightmare. Complexity by itself isn't fatal. It's how an organization responds when that complexity cracks. January 28, 1986. Challenger on the pad. A cold morning, barely 2 degrees Celsius. The launch delayed multiple times. Pressure to get it done. Engineers at Morton Thiokol know the O-rings that seal booster segments get brittle in cold weather. They've seen evidence of blow-by. The night before launch, they tell NASA, don't launch. Too cold, too risky. Management launches anyway. 73 seconds after liftoff, hot gas leaks through a failed O-ring, burns through the external tank, triggers a catastrophic explosion. 7 astronauts die. The engineers were right. The management was wrong. The pattern is simple. Schedule pressure plus political expectation outweighs technical concern. You classify some risks as acceptable. You tell yourself you've seen this before. You launch because the alternative is admitting the system doesn't work. February 1st, 2003. Columbia returning from a 16-day mission. During launch, foam broke off and struck the left wing. Engineers saw it on film, ran models, asked for satellite imagery to inspect the damage. Management decided it was not a safety issue. They had seen foam strikes before. This time was different. The foam punched a hole in the wing's leading edge. During re-entry, superheated gas flowed in and tore the orbiter apart over Texas. 7 more astronauts died. Same pattern. People knew, people warned, warnings dismissed. It's a phenomenon where people see something go wrong so often without a disaster that they stop seeing it as a threat. Foam strikes became routine. O-ring erosion became acceptable. The shuttle flew 135 times. 2 ended in catastrophe, a failure rate of 1 in 67. Commercial aviation aims for 1 fatal accident per million flights. After each disaster, NASA stood down for 2 years, investigated, redesigned, wrote new procedures. But the pressure to fly, to meet schedules, to justify the program that never went away. The strange part is, this is the same organization that put humans on the moon. So what changed? Apollo had an obsessive safety culture. Clear goal, clear timeline. The shuttle was designed by committee, shaped by military requirements, sold on impossible economics, operated under constant political scrutiny. When reality didn't match the promise, the organization doubled down. Hardware fails, but culture fails first. If management won't listen to engineers, if schedule pressure trumps safety, if you're more afraid of missing a launch than losing a crew, the system is already broken. Now, look at where we are with Artemis. First, credit where it's due. Artemis 1, November 2022. An uncrewed Orion flew around the moon and splashed down safely. It worked. 59 nations have signed the Artemis Accords. Canada is building a robotic arm. Europe supplies service modules. Japan contributes habitation modules. Real international partnership, commercial partnerships too. SpaceX's Starship as the lunar lander. Blue Origin developing a competitor. NASA buying services instead of building everything in-house. Different model. Could work. But we are seeing the same old red flags. Cost. SLS costs $4 billion per launch per NASA's Inspector General. mostly expendable. Boosters, core stage, upper stage thrown away. We're still paying disposable rocket prices. Complexity. Artemis isn't one vehicle, it's a chain. SLS launches Orion. Starship launches separately, refuels via at least a dozen tanker flights in Earth orbit, flies to the moon, meets Orion, lands 2 astronauts, returns them. Multiple elements, multiple vendors, perfect alignment required. We've traded one complicated vehicle for a complicated system. Culture. Political deadline. Moon by 2027 is driven by presidential terms, not engineering readiness. Internal SpaceX documents obtained by Politico in November 2025 show a different timeline. First orbital refueling demo, June 2026. Uncrewed lunar landing, June 2027. Earliest crewed landing attempt, September 2028. That's 18 months past NASA's public target. The program proceeds anyway. NASA's acting administrator publicly said SpaceX is behind schedule. He's opened the lander contract to Blue Origin as backup. Competition, sure. Also schedule pressure shaping decisions. And there's a variable the shuttle never had: China. China is on track for a crewed lunar landing by 2030. In August 2025, they tested their Lanyu lander. Their Long March 10 rocket is in development. In October 2025, they confirmed they're on schedule. If Artemis 3 slips to 2028, the gap shrinks to 2 years. The US could spend $93 billion and still come in second. It feels like the same 3 forces are clashing all over again. On cost, the shuttle promised cheap reusability and delivered billion-dollar flights. Now SLS costs $4 billion per launch and is mostly expendable. Commercial partners might fix this, but Starship's refueling hasn't been demonstrated yet. We're still paying disposable prices for a reusable future that's always just over the horizon. As for complexity, the shuttle was one vehicle trying to be 3. Artemis spreads that complexity across SLS, Orion, Gateway, and Starship. 4 programs, 4 contractors, 4 schedules. The failure points haven't decreased, they've just been moved around. Then there's the culture. The shuttle had schedule pressure, overriding warnings. Artemis has political deadlines driven by terms, not readiness. NASA's safety culture is stronger now, but the pressure to hit dates is already shaping decisions. The hardware changed. The incentives haven't. Are we doing something new? In some ways, yes. Real partnerships, deeper commercial involvement, more capable hardware. But cost, complexity, and culture are still pulling in the same directions that broke the shuttle. The shuttle failed because it tried to be everything, cost too much to turn around, and normalized risk until it broke. We're using the same language about sustainable moon missions while the same forces are at play. Rockets change. Physics and incentives don't. The shuttle taught us you can build something brilliant and still watch it fail, not because the engineering was bad, but because the system wouldn't listen. Artemis has better hardware, better partners, better intentions. But the same 3 forces are still pulling. Have we actually learned? Or are we just better at making the same promises sound new? If this video made you think differently about space exploration, subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.